Now, let's chill out, take it easy for a nice evening to close things off with a little fiction. And I want to take the opportunity to do the fiction by, of course, going out to space and horror and talk about the outer limits. Let's hear from the control voice.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
Okay. Now, there is one more piece of news that I'm going to provide towards the end. It's about this big economic conference in Russia. A very interesting thing in St. Petersburg that I got to see, which sort of is the follow-up to the collapse of the Soviet Union. I want to give that to you before we go. But let's talk fiction right now. And if you're joining us on our writer's side for BookTube on YouTube, on the channel that has just started up called Former Star Trek Writing Fellow, you want to find out maybe a little bit about writing for Star Trek or The Outer Limits on the remake of the show, the redo of the show, the continuation when it was on cable. I'm right here, and I'm ready to give you more information as we go with more episodes at Former Star Trek Writing Fellow over on YouTube and on Rumble. Please sign up. Follow the channel and spread the links for each episode. I think you'll love them. We're going to be talking about books. It's going to be part of BookTube. We'll be talking about script writing as well. And we'll be discussing movies, scenes, directors, movie music, TV themes, a lot of interesting stuff, and some really good literature. And that's where we went last night as we did Wordsmith Wednesday on Thursday, as they might say in Police Squad. How many fingers am I holding up? Thursday. And so we got to talk about a British writer who died fairly young, but made quite an impact for a lot of people and left a lot of wonderful things for people to enjoy later on. He was William Hope Hodgson. And we mentioned this book right here from Nightshade Press. Very cool stuff from them. The Boats of Glencarrig. And also I mentioned, as I discussed just before we started the segment, Horror Babble. And Horror Babble has a great version of one of his stories. And they have many of his stories, but this one in particular might be a wonderful way to introduce you to him. Well, The Voice in the Night by William Hope Hodgson. It's a terrific story. You can see the whole title there. Just go to the Horror Babble channel. I really, really like what they do. It's terrific. It's a wonderful opportunity for you to hear a story that might be a half hour long, 25 minutes long, an hour sometimes. Sometimes he puts together large chunks of stories in one giant video file. He has playlists of certain types of stories, as I mentioned. And I think the wisest thing is if you see an introduction, just sort of scroll through the introduction, because sometimes as he gives you the description of when it was published, 1955 in Weird Tales or whatever it might be, he might give you sort of an idea of what the story is. Sometimes he'll actually have it in there as this type of story. So you got to be kind of careful sometimes if you don't want terrible spoilers. But this one is just terrific. And if you scroll past the intro, I think you're going to be really entertained by it. The Voice in the Night by William Hope Hodgson. And I'm going to go over to Fantastic Fiction again, just to give you some information about William Hope Hodgson. Let me just type it in here. And of course, their algorithm will pop up with William Hope Hodgson almost right away. So let me just give that to you. Here it comes. Thank you. There it is. So there's a picture of him. As you see, William Hope Hodgson was born an English author. He produced a large body of work consisting of essays, short fiction, and novels. As I mentioned, he's very well known for The Nightland and The House on the Borderland. And I mentioned last night, I said something erroneous. F. Paul Wilson didn't name a book The Nightland. He called it Night World, one of his Repairman Jack novels. One of the last Repairman Jack novels was The Night World. Sort of culminates a 10-book series. Absolutely awesome. Well, as you can see on Fantastic Fiction, he produced a large body of work consisting of essays, short fiction, and novels, spanning several overlapping genres. And he did work in horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. And his early writing career, he dedicated some effort to poetry, although few of his poems were published during his lifetime. He also attracted some notice as a photographer and achieved some renown as a bodybuilder. But he died in World War I at the age of 40. He did see some horrible things, and you can understand that. So unfortunately, he never made it home. It's sad to say. So with that stated, William Hope Hodgson was one of the most influential writers of fantastic fiction, heavily influenced H.P. Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, a lot of authors, F. Paul Wilson, of course. This one is one of his nautical tales. And as I mentioned last night, many of his nautical tales, as we saw in the back of this book, many of his nautical tales actually were very popular then, and then sort of haven't been seen that much since then, because the fantasy fiction sort of came up with Weird Tales, the popularity of that. Television shows like The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, people love those things. And the nautical adventures sort of have gotten forgotten, to sort of be reiterative. But I want to turn to a story I think you'll enjoy for a little Friday night reading. And then we'll cover a little bit more in the story I've been writing called Tower. This is a story called Trading with the Enemy. All right, from the book The Boats of Glencarrig and Other Nautical Adventures by William Hope Hodgson. And it has a date on it in italics. Oil ship SS Ganymede, November 5th. Trouble has been looking for me today. I met a man ashore in a restaurant this morning who knew too much. That's the worst of doing the customs people in the eye. There's bound to be an odd person here and there who gets to know just a little too much for one's comfort, though I can assure you there are not a multitude of them. But I'll admit this beggar does know something the UK customs people would pay to have proof of. And he made it pretty clear that he's got the proofs right where he can put his dirty paws on them anytime it suits him. Well, mister, I said, what's the game anyway? Is it a cash gag you're looking for, or a berth as steward, or what? Neither, Captain, he said. I'd not rob you of the first, and I'd not trust myself afloat with you for the second. Well, I told him, then out with it. Captain, he remarked, I'd not reckon you pose as a violent patriot, do you? No, I don't, I said. I've not time for your fancy fireworks. I've got a living to make, and it's a deuce of a job as well. You're taking that old oil boat across to Holland tomorrow night, he remarked in a sort of full and by fashion. How'd you like to make £1,000 and have those letters handed across to you, so I'll have no pull on you anymore after that, eh, Captain? I took a good look at him. And if I don't do this, I said, what about that? In that case, Captain, you can rely on the letters going by registered packet to the UK customs people right away by tonight's post. Also, you'll be short 1,000 yellow boys, and someone else's do my little job. Someone else will do my little job while you spoil your pretty finger ends on old junk. You like the alternative, Captain? I don't, I said. Though, mind you, I'm not granting you could get me a job picking oakum. All the same, let's hear your proposition. 1,000 quid makes a bit of earning these days. Come up close, he said, and I hitched my chair right up to the table and leaned over a bit, so that he'd not require to shout the business, whatever it was, to the whole crowd in the eating house. You take the old Ganymede out tomorrow night, he told me for the second time. Well, Captain, if you want those letters and that 1,000 quid, I want you to arrange things so that you're off the Texel light from midnight to 4 a.m. on the night of the 8th. You'll have to keep outside the 3-mile limit, of course, and I reckon you'll have to fix things up with your chief engineer so as to make a darn slow trip of it, or you'll get there ahead of time. Go on, I suggested. Let's have the bunt of it. That's only the earrings. Just so, Captain, he said, grinning. While you're hanging around off the Texel, I shall want you to see that only 3 of your cabin ports on each side show a light, and the middle port of each 3 must be covered with a bit of blue celluloid that I'll supply you with. Maybe during the 4 hours I want you to hang around, you may get a visit from 3 or 4 small craft, anxious to buy petrol and oil. If they do, why, I just want you to sell them oil and petrol, as much as they want. German submarines, I interrupted. I couldn't swear to it, he said, grinning, but you never know your luck. And in any case, just to settle your mind a bit, there's at least 4 of them, and they're expecting you. So if you try to dodge them, well, Captain, I guess you'll just go right up to heaven on a gasoline fountain. And it'll be a hot going. Quit the threats, I told him. You won't get me that way. What about the letters and the cash? Do I have them now, or how? He shoved a tricky finger to the side of his nose. Captain, he said, you gets the cash and letters from them, as you sells the petrol and oil, too. But just to show I'm talking business, I'll pay you $250 right now, provided you agree to be there at the time and show these 3 lighted ports aside, same as I've described. I'll trust your word for that much. I shrugged my shoulders. It's a cleft stick proposition, it seems to me, all the way, I said. How do I know they won't hang on to the rest of the cash and all the letters? Captain, he began, I give you my word of honor. Don't, I said. Talk sense. He looked ugly a moment, then grinned. Well, I grant, Captain, he said, maybe it's worn a bit thin, but you've just got to take it or leave it, see? I'm only the agent in this biz, but I've the word of some straight men as you'll get a square deal if you do what I've put you up to. But be there, with the ports lit, like I tell you, from midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning of the 8th. And anyway, Captain, if you don't fall for it, you'll certainly never get across, not in all one piece. And I reckon I know what I'm saying. They'll lay for you. So be a wise guy and go for the 1,000 quid and letters, and after that, well, you can call it a hold-up, just to keep your face clean. You won't never have no one smelling a rat if you go at it like the wise one you're known for. Hand over the $250, I said at last. I guess it's not as bad as murder, anyway. No murder about it, Captain, he said. Just a little business on the way across. And if you hand the engineer 100, he'll never open his talking trap, and that'll mean 900 for your own bankroll. Here you are, Captain. And if a British cruiser drops on me while I'm selling gasoline out there across the counter, I said as I counted and examined the notes. Pleasant for me. I'll be liable to be shot on sight. He shrugged his shoulders as he rose from the table. Naturally, Captain, he said, yawning. That's your lookout. As you just said now, 1,000 quid makes a bit of earning, not to mention those letters. Anyway, I've got your word, and I guess you've been known to keep it? Yes, I said, sighing a bit. I keep my word, mister, and I'll advise you to keep out of my way from now onward. I don't feel friendly to you, not by a whole lot. Ah, just so, he said, grinning. I'm not aching to hang around your neck. So long, Captain. There you have the mess I'm into. I hate it like poison, but talk is easy. I'm into it, and I suppose I've got to go through with the business. Darn that sneaky spy. If ever I get my hands on him, after I've got those letters safe, I guess he'll know a thing or two that'll help to fit his soul for the Milky Way. We are now, November 6th, night, North Sea. We're underway at last. The whole day's been a nightmare, thinking about things, but I can see no way of getting hold of those letters except by meeting the submarines. And of course, I've given my word now. I make a point always of sticking to what I promise. The 2 circles of blue celluloid were brought down aboard by a messenger boy just before we cast off. He's pretty plain. Everything's been cut and dried and is set. November 7th. I had to fix things up with old Mac, my chief engineer. I just told him the whole business. Honesty's the best policy sometimes, even when you're bucking head foremost into a mess, like I'm doing. I handed Mac over the whole of the 250 I've already drawn as his share, and he's just arranging things in the engine room so that no one will suspect anything. I don't know just what he's done, but he's cut our speed down by a good 3 knots an hour, and I reckon that should land us off the Texel light anywhere between 11 and 12 tomorrow night. And meanwhile, I'm feeling a bit easier, for I've been, I'll admit frankly, in the deuce of a funk, lest any of the engine room gang might guess we were cutting her speed down on purpose. And once let them get that notion into their head, they'll be sure to smell a rat. And I guess I can't afford any unnecessary suspicion just now. But once I've got those letters back and safely burnt, I don't doubt I'll feel different. I was a fool ever to write the letters. But plotting and planning to go one better than the customs forces, forces a man to take risks with his personal liberty now and again. After all, it's true enough that a man gets what he has sown. Anyway, that's how I feel about this trap. The same day, November 7th, evening. A big British destroyer overhauled us this afternoon and sent a boat aboard to look at our papers. Believe me, I'm sweating still with the cold shivers I got when the lieutenant in charge of the boat's crew asked me what our engine power was and remarked that we steamed like she was an old tub. She's not steaming up well at this trip, I told him. Mr. McAllen, our chief engineer, was only saying this morning that she'll want to have her cylinders rebored if we're going to keep expenses down and shove her speed up. He's right. Mac hadn't said anything of the sort, as you will understand. But I'd got to say something. And anyway, I knew the man wasn't an engineering officer, or he'd be doing boarding duty. So I suppose he'd swallowed it all right. Mac hadn't said anything of the sort, as you'll understand, but I'd got to say something. And anyway, I knew the man wasn't an engineering officer, or he'd not be doing boarding duty. So I supposed that he had swallowed it all right, though he was inquisitive enough to take a look into the engine room and chat a bit with Mac. When he had gone and told us to go on ahead, Mac came along to have a word with me. "What like was yon chap, Cap'n?" he asked straight away. I shrugged my shoulders. "I guess you know just as much about it as I do, Mac," I told him. "What's at the back of your mind that sets you thinking like this, my son?" "Just nothing, Captain," he replied. "I were just wondering how a plain ignorant sailor man, same as you'd reckon him to be, come to know so darn much about engines." "What?" I said. "What's that, Mac?" "What makes you think he knew anything about engines?" "Well, Captain," said Mac in his quiet, dry way, "you spun him a little yarn about our needing our cylinders rebored. You'd been wiser to have left him leaning to me. I'm thinking, for it needs an expert to give the right thoughts. I refer to my profession. You understand? Ignorant sailormen can lie about engines without running risks. And that's not what you're doing, Captain. When you passed yon port about needing, when you passed yon story about needing our cylinders reborn, what makes you think that he knew anything about our engines than any intelligent sailorman is likely to know?" I asked the old beggar, feeling a bit yellow. Mac, however, was in one of his short moods and turned away. But after 3 steps he paused and spoke over his shoulder. "Sailormen, Captain, are just plain ignorant, as any engineer will tell you," he said. "Yon laddie, he kenned the relationship between firing a boiler pressure and, not to speak of piston speed and throttle opening, just to mention the plain alphabet of the rudiments of engine running. A blind mule could differentiate between the running of an engine and needing reborn, and one that's perfectly steam tight, same as mine. Difference fair shouts, and I'm sure yon laddie could read the signs better than you. Anyway, if aught happens, you'll know it weren't my fault, and I wish you would understand your mistake now." And with that, he left me with a fresh infernal worry to add to all my others. November 8th, evening. I'm feeling more comfortable in my mind. This business seems to be going all right. I fancy old Mac got fancying things about that naval officer. Anyway, he's nothing in sight now, and we're shaping nicely to be off the Texel by midnight. This time tomorrow, the whole beastly strain of it will be over, and I shall have those letters, if the Germans mean to play straight with me. But there'll be a matter of several £150 as well. 750 quid. Not to be sneezed at these days. But I'll not forget the chap that mixed me up with all this. I'll even end up with him one of these days, and meanwhile, the thing is to do what I've got to do without being caught, for that will certainly mean a firing party, and not even the confounded letters would matter at all then. November 9th, early morning. I kept my promise and saw to it that no light was shown through any of our ports except 3, each side of the cabin. Also, I fixed the circles of blue celluloid in the middle port of each side. We're off the Texel Light, about 7 miles from the coast, at exactly 11:45 p.m. I rang to dead slow, and then went down and fixed up the ports, per the directions. But after that was just a case of waiting. At 12:25, we were hailed in good English from some vessel on the landward side of us. "This is the oil ship Ganymede, from London to the Hook," I sung out. "Who are you?" I was sweating a bit, for I knew that only a war vessel of some kind would be messing round with no lights showing, and the hail had been in such perfect English I couldn't swear that it wasn't a British naval officer who was singing out to us. At that moment, the last thing in this wide world I wanted to see was a British sea scout. I guess you can imagine my feelings. And then, I heard something that put heart into me. It was a German voice talking. I knew then, at least I was practically certain, that it was one of the German submarines that had found us. Immediately afterwards, the man who had hailed us sung out again. "We're coming alongside. Don't try any tricks, or we'll make a mess of you." I said nothing. The thing was so typically German in sentiment that I knew it was meant literally. It came from the heart. And then from the port side came another hail in English, though this time with a distinct German accent. "What ship is that?" "The oil ship Ganymede from London to the Hook," I said. "What do you want?" "Are you Captain Galt?" asked the voice. "I am," I answered. "What about it?" "We're coming alongside, Captain," replied the voice. "Try no tricks, or from the water we shall blow you." Sweet lot, I said to myself. They're keen on blowing. Politeness not on the list of extras at their little boarding establishments. "That you, Caddy?" called the first voice from the submarine on our starboard side. This was the German. Then, sotto voce, to some companions, I heard, "It's Caddy in the S-24. We'll make him wait. We get alongside first." I stirred a bit as I heard what he had said, for I knew very well that the S submarines are the new 1,200-ton type of sea-going boats just completed by Germans for the express purpose of smashing up our merchantmen and so trying to starve our little British tummies. Then, simultaneously, both on the port and starboard bows, there came fresh hails, also in English, but both somewhat Germanic. "What ship is that?" said the one from broad away on the starboard bow in a long, drawn-out hail. "Give me the name of that ship," bellowed the voice on the port bow, but from close at hand. "It's Schultz and old Grunwald," said the man who had first hailed me in violently idiomatic German to his unseen companion, though, for that matter, I couldn't see any of them. The night was too dark for any of that, though the sea was as still as a pond, or pretty near it. The hails were repeated in a somewhat wrathy fashion, as if ghost-like, and the first comer sung out to them in German, to "Speak English! Herr Captain does not understand you." This was unkind sarcasm, whereat there was laughter from the sea all around the ship, so it seemed to me, and in the same moment I had two further hails, one of them in first-rate English. "What ship is that?" they asked. I repeated my text like a kindergarten school chorus. "And you?" I asked in return. "How many of you are there? And what on earth do you want, anyway?" "I guess we want juice, Captain," they told me. "We're willing to pay for it, and maybe we'll be able to make you a present of something you'll be glad to have. But let me tell you straight, if there's any funny business, we'll blow you out of the water." "Good Lord," I said, "another blower. For the Lord's sake, quit the threats. What you're all going to do to this old packet of mine, if I happen to breathe without permission, is likely to injure her constitution. I suppose a German's not happy if he's not blowing up something. You'll find out all about all of that if you talk too much, Captain Galt," he said in a grim sort of way. It was queer how they had my name at the ends of their tongues. Shows how the whole thing had been planned from back to front. Some big spying going on around our coasts. That was fairly plain. "The Commodore's here," I heard the first comer saying to his companion in German. Then the man who spoke perfect English said, "We'll come alongside now. 3 on each beam, Captain, and start filling up. We'll be away inside of 2 hours. If you act sensible and do your part like a wise man, we will. Tell your engineer to have the gasoline pipes rigged. The sooner we're filled up and away, the better for us and for you too, Captain. So get a move on you." 10 minutes later, they were all fast alongside, and 6 different pipes were pumping their petrol tanks full as hard as our pumping engine could run. And they could just hold some essence, too, I can tell you. We put 130 tons of liquid into each of them. They were all the new ocean-going Model S boats before they sang out to us to cut off and take the hoses back aboard. And they ran no risks either. They drew off and tested the stuff from each tank as we tapped it, drawing a full bucketful of essence through each hose and trying it for density and gassing. The last was done with a curious little spray pump and a sparkling contact breaker connected with a dry battery. They were a smart, cute lot of men, right enough. But they were painfully uncivil. And I thought once my temper was going to get the better of me, only I needed those letters badly, not to mention my life. But to show the breed, they commandeered all my cigars, all that is that they could find, and all the liquor whiskey in my cabin. Nor did they offer to pay for any of it when I remonstrated, but had the infernal impudence to tell me that the 750 pounds they were going to hand over to me was sufficient to cover the smokes and the drinks. I realized then how true is the saying that you can make an efficient man out of a German, but never a gentleman out of a German. However, the 6 commanders, having drunk the Kaiser's health in my whiskey, paid me the 750 pounds as agreed upon, and then the one they called the Commodore handed me a packet of letters, on which I pounced. I ripped the cord away and opened and looked them through. Yes, they were the letters, all right, but there should have been 8, and I had been given only 6. 6, I said, turning to the Commodore. There should be 8 of those letters. You have given me only 6. The beggar wasn't at all ashamed. He didn't even deny it. "I've the other 2 in my pocket, Captain," he said. "We may want your services again in future. And these," he slapped the breast of his coat, "may be an inducement to make you run risks where a cash payment alone might fail. Not that Captain Galt has not always got his price, of course." Now that's the exact place where I nearly let my temper go. The darned measliness of hauling me into a mess like they had done, and then slamming that into my face, nearly pulled the lid right off my steam box. But fortunately, I kept hold of myself, or I'd not be alive now, I swear. Instead of doing anything rash, I realized that I had worked largely in vain in trying to get hold of these confounded letters. And now the only thing to do was to get the officers out of the ship before I lost control of my temper and started the beginning of a very bad mess. "Gentlemen," I said, as soon as I could keep my voice fairly steady, "you had better be going. Every minute you stay here increases the risks, both for yourselves and for me. It is plainly useless to—" Boom! Went the roar of a great gun from somewhere quite near, and then in the same instant 3 successive booms of sound and a great crash of an explosion alongside, which seemed to shake the vessel. "My Gott!" shouted several of the German officers, and there was a dash for the decks. The whole night seemed to be one blaze of light. There were at least 20 odd searchlights playing on the ship from both port and starboard. Everything aboard was as bright as day. The German officers rushed, shouting, to the sides. I ran to the port side and started over the side. The foremost submarine was just disappearing in a smother of oil and broken water. She'd been hit, and two others on that side had shut down the hatches of their conning towers and were rapidly submerging themselves. As I stared, there flicked out half a dozen fierce red flashes from below the searchlights to port, and instantly the whole sea roared to the crashes of bursting shells and heavy gunfire, whilst the port side of the old Ganymede forward of me seemed to splash into volcanoes of fire and flying iron. And then, crash! The whole of the forward decks, everything, roared heavenwards in a spout of giant flame. The shells had slapped right into the forward oil containers. The entire foreport of the ship bumped, just as if a giant had licked her from underneath, and then she rolled over slowly to starboard. And I saw that already there were about a dozen power launches pelting for us at full speed, plain to see in the tremendous light all about us. I went tumbling downward, down the slope of the decks, struck the rail with my body, a brute of a thump, and flopped over like a sack into the sea. I was vaguely conscious as I went that all about me others were doing the cascading trick in similar style. I wasn't stunned or seriously damaged in any way, and as soon as I hit the water, it was so beastly, freezingly, brutal cold, I had all my wits about me in a moment. I plowed up to the surface at the rate of knots, got the water out of my eyes and nose, and yelled to everybody near me to swim away from the Ganymede before she took the final dip. Then I did some tall swimming on my own, and in the midst of it, I guess the Ganymede went, for there was a terrific explosion, and showers of burning drops of oil fell all over the sea for hundreds of yards around. The next thing I knew, a launch was coming for me full speed, and I had to roar at the fools to shut off or steer wide, one or the other. 2 minutes later, they hauled me aboard, and just about 1 hour after that, aboard one of the British light cruisers. I was the center, or shall I say the vortex, of a lively bit of moral disagreement, the liveliest I've ever experienced. I have been given some rum, a towel, and a change of clothes, and finally, just short of finish to the general tout ensemble, I suppose. Yes, the final bit, a pair of handcuffs, and a firm invitation to accompany two particularly muscular and hefty-looking gentlemen to the captain's cabin. I did not know the name of the cruiser till I entered the cabin, but there I saw it, and that is censored, beautifully inlaid in solid silver on a bronze shield, and it was pushed into the forward bulkhead. And anyway, I was worrying less about that than the things I had to say to the captain of that particular cruiser. There were 4 officers in British naval uniforms in the cabin, all sitting around a table, and there were 5 out of the 8 German officers dressed in undress uniforms, which had evidently been lent them by the officers of the cruiser. The chap they had called the Commodore was among them, and it was pretty plain that they were being well treated. A good cigar each, I recognized the smell, and no handcuffs. I held mine out so that everyone in the cabin could see them. "Why these, gentlemen?" I said. "Shut up," said the biggest of the 2 aforesaid muscular blue jackets, speaking as much into my ear as possible. No one, except the courteous blue jacket, seemed to be even aware that I had spoken, and I decided to wait and see what was going to happen. From the look of the 4 officers around the table, I judged I was in for a solemn time, and that they were simply trying to settle in their minds whether to shoot me with half a dozen rifles or a 6-inch cannon. Disappointing economy, I decide, would would preclude the 6-inch method, which should have been a comfort, but it wasn't. They had no difficulty in proving me guilty, right up to the hilt, for it was plainly and obviously what our leading novelists in their highly original phraseology term a case of having been caught red-handed. However, the German officer who spoke English seemed determined that I should have no loophole, and he explained how I had voluntarily agreed to meet them and sell them oil for a personal consideration of 1,000 pounds in cash, plus certain letters of a compromising character. He advised a search through the pockets of the clothes I had worn when picked up, and finally he exhibited the 2 letters which he had refused to give me just before the catastrophe, and handed those over to the 4 solemn-faced officers as a sort of final tombstone for the grave of poor old Master Mariner Galt. "That gentleman," said the English-speaking German, "will sure show you that he's a proper outsider, a proper double-crosser." I stared at the man, for it was plain he felt pretty ugly to me. Then I twigged. He'd evidently got some notion into his head that I'd double-crossed him and brought the cruisers down on his track. The man was a fool. Good heavens! I'd more to fear from the cruisers and more to lose than ever he had, in spite of his having been taken prisoner. But anyway, it was no use arguing with that sort of a grouch. I could see that. But he made me crazy to get one good fair punch at him, right into his solar plexus. I didn't give up all hope. Meanwhile, the officer in charge of the show, a court-martial, I believe they called it, was explaining the particulars regarding hour and place, when and where. He meant a number of his men to put daylight through me at that hour. In plain English, it appeared plausible that some morning, some daylight, and death were to effect an unpleasant conjunction for G. Galt, Master Mariner. This was bad enough in its way, but when he got his beard wagging about my sins and set out to add insult to arranged injury by pointing out that I was a traitor of so particularly putrid a breed that it would soil the boots of any honest sailor should they adventure to wipe them on me, why, I thought it time to make my little speech, my swan song, as it were. Said I, in the little absolute silence that always follows a death sentence, "Gentlemen, may I ask a question or two?" They nodded agreement. A condemned man always has special privileges extended to him as soon as he's safely condemned. "What is it, Captain Galt?" said the senior officer. "What are we doing?" I asked, and looked up at the telltale compass on the deck above my head. No one answered. They didn't know quite how to take a question of that sort at that time. So I continued. "I see we're heading west-southwest, and by the feel of her, and seeing she's a 30-knot boat, I should say we're doing all that, so we ought to be quite 60 knots west-southwest of the place where you sunk my ship." "I cannot listen to all this talk," the senior officer said quietly. "Have you anything else to say?" "A lot," I told him, speaking quietly too. "Supposing instead of all this balderdash and these," I held up the handcuffs, "you bout ship and get back again. You should get there just nicely by daylight. And while we're going, give orders to have these taken off." "Is that all you have to say?" he interrupted, rising, as a signal that I had exceeded the privileges of the condemned. "There are just 2 things," I said, and they all paused there about the table with a sort of deadly, quiet curiosity. "First of the 2 is, am I condemned for this oil trade I've been into?" "That expresses it," replied the senior officer, and waited for me to finish. "The second is, Can a submarine do anything except sink to the bottom or rise to the surface if her accumulators are played out and her fuel tanks empty? What do you mean, sir? Said the senior officer with a sudden new tone in his voice, and I saw that everyone in the cabin was looking at me queerly. I mean, I said, quite quietly and very slowly, so as to have the full enjoyment of saying it, I mean that as poor old Mac and I pumped salt water solidly for 2 hours into the tanks of those submarines, you'll not run far, at least, or they will not run far, at least. I turned to the English-speaking German. Perhaps you will tell us whether German submarines can run their engines on a saltwater diet. My word, but I never got further. The whole cabin was in an uproar. The blue jackets had me to leave unsupported while they subdued the English-speaking German. Then, when quiet came again, I began to explain quite a number of things. And long before I had finished, the senior officer himself had unlocked the handcuffs with his own hands. You see, I concluded, I told poor old Mac the whole of my pickle, and we arranged between us to fix up bypasses to the salt water pump and connect these up to the oil hoppers. When these German officers here drew off their test bucketfuls, we gave them good, honest essence. But when we had the pipes into the tanks, we gave them nice, clean, honest enough salt water, and they never guessed. Why should they? And now, gentlemen, if you go back there and wait, you'll be bound to get the 5 you didn't sink when they came up to breathe, or when they come up to breathe, eh? Anyway, they're here until the judgment, unless they can get someone to sell them something stronger than salt water. And that'll not be easy if you keep a scout there to watch for them. Meanwhile, I'd like those 2 letters. I fancy I've earned them. And that is the end of Trading with the Enemy by William Hope Hodgson, published probably around 1914 or so. I'll have to look that up. 1916, I don't know. I thought the co-pilot was here, but I guess not. So William Hope Hodgson, there he is, doing his thing. He did spend a lot of time aboard ships. He knew his nautical stuff very, very well, obviously. And just like, Jack London working off the West Coast, Northwest and stuff like that, going up in Alaska, around Seattle and stuff, really knew what he was doing. And there's Mr. Hodgson right there. I don't know what his final position was in the military, so don't know where he ended up. But, of course, he died at the age of 40, World War I. And as you know, on the back of this from Nightshade Press, they describe, his great influences on so many people like Arthur Machen and, Algernon Blackwood and Lovecraft and so on. So I hope you like that. Yeah, I hope you like that. Let's see. We've got a lot of comments here. Let's see. Skunk Hollow says, I live for these readings. Keep the mind in action until the final round. Yeah, that was a fun story. It was difficult sometimes because he had colloquialisms in there and time-based stuff that was really for his contemporary audience at that time. Thanks. Skunk Hollow says the way you're reading this material, very easy to put myself there. Thanks, man. Yeah, and I changed a few of the words occasionally, but I'm not going to edit the live readings. I think. For the final YouTube channels and Rumble channels when I put these out. I'll just put this out. I might do some in the future, but says also your new YouTube channel is off the chain. The script writing techniques is amazing, like beyond belief. Access to a pro. Thank you for all that. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I'll show you what it was like when we did the story breakdowns in Star Trek Voyager. In fact, there's a book that took a picture of Rob Doherty in front of the board that I had written because I was away getting a gift for Jerry Taylor, who was retiring. I was buying her a little tea set. And so I was off, just off of a few streets away from Paramount. And then I came back and they're like, oh, the guy doing the book on Star Trek Voyager, he wanted to get a shot of you in front of the board, but you weren't here. So Rob stood in for you. So it's Rob Doherty standing there at the board, but it's my writing on the board. It's kind of a funny thing. So that was fun. And yeah, over at Rumble, I've got, he says, cool middle name, says Birdhouse Blues. Hope. Yeah, that's true. Birdhouse says, excellent choice, trading with the enemy. Yeah, that was really neat. And he says, cool ending. Did the captain get to keep the 1,000 pounds? And did he get the 2 letters? Kind of left us hanging. Yeah, that was really interesting. That's pretty cool stuff. And, you know, I like it too because, you know, it's just plot. It's got a lot of mystery to it. The description of the, you know, the sea being very still, the darkness and so on, trying to keep track of all those voices coming at you is kind of confusing, you know, what's going on with all that. So it lends to the confusion, interestingly enough. Sometimes when you have a lot of different characters, different vectors of action and dialogue coming in, you want to be able to keep track of it. And sometimes the author doesn't do a good job there, but he exploited that to great effect. He did a really good job with that. That was really cool. It's coming in all over the place, you know, and you do think that he's kind of a bad character, right? So very, very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. A World War I adventure. All right, let's talk adventure right now by looking at Tower. And I'll tell you what I've got so far on Tower. Again, if you're just joining us on former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel on YouTube or on Rumble, I'm Gardner Goldsmith, and thanks for joining us. Please share the links and share the videos. You'll find a lot of interesting ones so far, I think, and there'll be a lot more to come as we get into script writing, showing scenes from movies and analyzing those things, that sort of stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really hoping to get some good growth on the viewership over at YouTube and at Rumble. That would be great. So please share any of the videos you like, share the channel. That would be a real help. I really appreciate it. And of course, go to my Substack. We're going to start doing stuff, doing work, I should say, describing things for script writing and suggestions for really good books and things like that. I hope you like these suggestions so far. So the story so far for Tower. Caroline and Paul work for, and again, I'm sensitive. I mentioned this last week. I'm sensitive to the fact that this only gives you little bits and pieces. It shows the work in progress as it's going. And I hope that's sort of something that can be appreciated and has appeal, because as you read little bits and pieces, you know, it takes a while. You're writing something, you don't have a lot of time to write. And so you're sort of hoping that you can interest the reader as you're going along a little more, and it gets a little more mysterious. So I hope that's happening here. The story so far for Tower is that this is a big reservoir in Vermont in 1960. And in the middle of the reservoir, way far away from the shore, is an island that used to be a hill in this tiny, tiny hamlet called Frenton, Vermont. And decades before it was taken over through eminent domain by the government, and they flooded it. And they use it as a reservoir now. Around it is a very, very big forest, and around the forest is a big chain-link fence. Nobody's supposed to go in. So these 2 forestry workers for the state of Vermont are there to go to the island to check out the fire tower that used to be on the top of this hill. And it's just rocks and scrub. There are no trees there, hardly anything there. It's mid-November, towards late November. It's getting cold. So they go to close it up for the season, make sure everything's secure. Nobody's supposed to go there in the first place. They check the outer fence. That looks secure, but then they notice there are deer tracks right before they launch their canoe. There are deer tracks in the mud, so maybe there's a breach in the fence somewhere. They get to the island, and sure enough, someone has gone into it during some time period and has written graffiti on one of the windows. There's really nothing there. There's no radio contact. There's no electricity. There's no heat. It's just this metal box on a big platform, and that's it. And it has some windows, and one of the windows is broken. So essentially what happens is, after they pull the canoe up and they check everything out, the canoe, there's a big snow squall, and the wind is so strong it blows the canoe far off ashore. They hadn't pulled it up far enough, and now it's offshore. The water's so cold, Paul tries to swim out to it, can't get the thing pulled up because the line from the bow of the canoe is attached to something. It's caught on something under the water, and he almost dies. She pulls him in. He gets hypothermia. They go inside for the night. They bundle together in what, warm clothing they've got, and wake up the next day and say, okay, well, we can expect to be rescued. And then they figure out that first, when Caroline, the woman, signed out the Jeep from the headquarters or one of the offices, she didn't actually sign it out. She just grabbed it. She was in a hurry. She got the keys and didn't write out that they were going to be there. And the scheduled appointment for them to lock it up is not on the schedule. It's been taken off the schedule. They don't have any significant loved ones. They're both single. They don't have any family. So nobody knows they're there. So now they're like, well, we're going to be here for a number of days. So Paul has put out a little SOS thing in the snow that fell, put that out with rocks. And she's gone around, and she and he have noticed that there are little ribbons that are tied to this barbed wire fencing that goes all around it. And the ribbons are shaped like scorpions, which is really weird. So they are able to get some worms, and they use a portion of the barbed wire like hooks, put multiple worms on them, poke open the worms, put them on there, and they're able to catch a couple sunfish. They bring them inside, and this is where we go. And they have a little fire that they've been able to make through putting together some of the filing cabinets near the hole in the window so the smoke goes over. They have a little bonnet for it so the smoke will hopefully go the other direction. And they're hopefully going to get their fish cleaned. And I said this. To her surprise, the idea and the jerry-rigged fishing line worked. It took hours and multiple tries. It took numerous tests and failures and a lot of worms. But after getting over the initial revulsion of piercing, desperate night crawlers on the sharp spikes, and after learning that they had to yank up that line at the first twitch, potentially losing bait for the sake of a catch, they had 2 small fish laid on the moss. And they had water and rocks, and the rocks were jagged enough to scale and clean the little creatures. What they didn't have was a great deal of remaining daylight. And so, at what might have been 4 p.m., they packed the prizes in snow and carried them upstairs to boil or broil the bits of meat and bones over their tiny fire. Ceilings too low, ceilings too high, ceilings too high, seating too low. What? She says. She looked up from the warm mug in her hand to take in his firelit features, and his lambent eyes returned to his own meal, the ceramic mug and the plastic fork, and the aromatic steam that blended with the thick, dirty, memory-evoking scent of smoke engulfing them on the floor. England, he said, and brought another forkful of the boiled fish to his mouth. This makes me think of the bad food they have over there. Boiled. Everything boiled. Veggies boiled. Meats, chicken, soups. Fish? I'd looked forward to some of their famous fish and chips when we stopped over after cycling out of Korea, but he shrugged. Boiled. Caroline smiled and ate some more. Are you saying this is a meal fit for a king? And he smiled back. Or a queen. Touché. Then he added, better than Korea, of course. We did a lot of fishing there when we could, and when we figured it was okay to make a fire and cook. And he has recalled to her a story about how he was working in CIA for a CIA. He was working in Korea for a CIA guy running messages through Korea, and the leader, the CIA leader guy, killed a little boy after killing the little boy's dog in the night. And the little boy put up a fight with a little hatchet, and so Paul has a scar on his side because of it. And you can see he feels pretty guilty about what was done to the little boy. But he's thinking about cycling out, and when he got to stay in England for a little while here, he says, she says, what do you mean about the ceilings? What did you mean about the ceilings? He chewed, pointed with the fork as if in thanks for her reminder. All the big drafty old manor houses in the countryside. They're long past their glory days and occupied by people of much lower means. I think World War II hit those people hard. Patriarchs lost, first and second sons buried in distant dirt and ocean. A couple friends of mine had relatives in those places, and it was weird, kind of disconcerting, like watching slow, unstoppable decay. They had enormous rooms they couldn't care for, with high ceilings, drapes, enormous French doors, unused pianos stacked with newspapers, bookshelves piled way above one's head. They hadn't enough cash to handle upkeep, so the places were filled to the gills with dust and clutter, and furnished with old couches and soft chairs. There was a feeling of suffocation. The damned cushions were too low and ratty. You'd sit in a mausoleum and see the ancient and forgotten, or feel the surrender and indifference, and then you'd be trapped in a strange sponge of a seat cushion with armrests that rose above your shoulders. Just weird. He poked at the fish. I got the impression that they had accepted some sort of behavioral conditioning, like kept animals, still living in accordance with their old ration days. A moment of silence passed as they ate, each occasionally extruding a bone from pursed lips to wipe it onto their pants or flick it into the gathering gloom. You ever traveled abroad? He asked. Caroline shook her head, an honest lamentation. Local, pretty much. I was raised in a series of orphanages and foster homes. Shoot, I'm sorry. Hope I'm not dredging up bad memories. Caroline smiled at him, knowing the firelight would show it, and hoping her honest display gave him the right impression. Not at all, Paul. It wasn't so bad. Each of us experiences crazy things in life, and sometimes in the heat of the madness, it's hard to see the benefits. It must have been hard at times. It was, and I can't offer what some might consider an easy answer, that I didn't know any different, because during those times when a foster couple or a family would take me in, I would go to a regular public school, and I could just feel how the others didn't know how to assess me, that they'd look at me with a mixture of pity and incomprehension. And it almost always made them stay distant, left me sitting alone at the lunch table. Alone. I had to work hard to make friends, but at the same time, I had to not look desperate or artificial. She took another forkful of the fish, teasing the flavors from the meat and the oil, thinking about school lunches, bad potatoes, fish sticks on Fridays, and chopped veg that she always threw away. I've thought about travel, part of my plan to find my parents. So they're still alive? He said more as a statement rather than an inquiry, and she pulled one side of her mouth. I don't know. They completed the last few bites of the meal in silence, and Caroline placed more twigs on the hungry little fire. Wish I had more substantial food to feed this poor little thing here, she said. It's good enough, and we'll need it. I have an instinctive sense that tonight will be colder than last, he said. And I'm already feeling grimy, like I need a bath. I'm not going to slide into the water again, that's for sure. Oh, here, Paul extended his open hand. Give me your mug. I'll grab the others that are around here, and I'll go get more water. Then we can heat some over the flame and use it to refresh ourselves a little bit. I'll throw out the bones while I'm down there. And she handed it to him, suddenly pleased that, being stranded here at least, they didn't have to worry about scent-sensitive bears making themselves a nuisance. When he returned, they set about breaking more twigs and leaves off their store of burnable material, and as the heavy eyelid of night descended upon them, they warmed the water by placing their mugs in a circle around the flames. Caroline tested the water with a finger, anticipating where in their curious abode would be most conducive to leaving a puddle when she dribbled it into her hair and on her face. They had 3 mugs each, unless they wanted to descend in darkness and gather more, repeating the process. Paul issued a whimsical sense of regret that they hadn't a single tea leaf or shred of mint in their collected store of brush, and they waited, the cocoa darkness thickening around them, and the ageless sorcery of fire asserting its dominance over their most prominent features, shifting and caressing with strokes of amber and orange, as if intent on making their dirty, oily faces works of Halloween art. When they had heated and used the water, After they had enjoyed the cleansing, almost healing culmination of their multiple stages of work, and after they had offered small smiles and sighs of satisfaction for the feeling of that warm liquid helping to cut the grease and grime and shed it from their skin, they sat back, faces dripping and glistening in the light of the fire. Paul looked around, as did Caroline, finally taking off his state-issued button-down shirt and using the sleeves to dry himself, and Caroline used some spare paper to do the same. Then she poked it onto the paper clips near the fire and sat beside him, close to the little campfire. Paul nodded. Job loyalty won't prevent me from burning every record and graph here if we need to, Caroline, he said. Oh, I'm with you. But so far, so good. His eyes strayed to the floor, and he inclined his head. You don't mind bunking side by side again, do you? It's fine, she said. It worked well last night, and I suspect you're right. I think it's going to be colder tonight. With a nod, he brought up his knees once more and leaned onto them. I'll see if I can remember some old ghost stories. And Caroline nodded as well. It wasn't paradise by any stretch, but with that bit of food and the fire and new sense of cleanliness, the surety of sleeping comfortably through the night seemed much more reasonable. She awoke abruptly to the sound of his moans. Beside her, wrapped in his jacket and wearing his hat and gloves, Paul grunted, flinched back as he lay beside her on his side. He bent at his waist, grunted again, and Caroline slid closer, seeing his tightly shut eyes and grimacing, strained expression. Paul? He gritted his teeth, rolled onto his back, and she got to her knees and went to him. Jesus, oh! Oh, sorry, he says. Oh, Jesus, oh, he says. Paul? When she got to him, he grunted again, placing his hands on his stomach. What? Heat rose from his exposed skin, poisonous and alive. In an instant, he was up, scrambling to the corner where Caroline had washed her face and hair, grunting and moaning and vomiting in great explosive bursts that splattered into the firelight and away into the dark. He drooled and coughed and sank to his hands and knees, and when she reached him, he was breathing hard. Oh, Jesus, he hissed, and upchucked again with a strange, strangled, inarticulate cry. Paul! The fish! I must have screwed up. Oh, man, oh! He vomited again, and Caroline put her hands on his shoulders, feeling him heave and heave, smelling the acidic effluvium, the tang in the air that had once been inside the man. He was shaking. Jesus, Caroline, God! And that's it. So that's where we stand right now with Tower. And Paul obviously didn't clean the fish very well. Not good. Not good. Oh, man. Oh, this is cool. I see. Skunk Hollow says, love it. This is great. Thank you. It says, talk about a cool Friday evening send-off. Oh, right on, man. Yep. And now things are going to start getting very complicated for them. Yep. Birdhouse Blues has the link to the Sons of Hercules. Give me some Inside Rumble if you want to get it, everybody. Tony Ty 06 says, what's that song? Gimme some song. Yep. What's that? Gimme some song. Yep. And Birdhouse says, I heart Tower, Inside Rumble. Excellent stuff. Excellent stuff. And Birdhouse mentions, I think you're talking, Birdhouse, about how he used the confusion and the darkness to great effect there. He says, totally agree, Guard. Nice. Yeah. I thought that was very good. You know, as a writer, I'm very sensitive to when people fail because they introduce too many characters, because you got to put yourself in the mind of the reader. You got to keep things pretty efficient when you're doing stuff like that. And if you're going to do stuff like that, it's probably best to split things off or have things done by accent, that sort of thing. It's with that, he did a real good job there. The mystery of these voices off in the distance, very cool. In fact, if you do go to Horror Babble and listen to that story that I mentioned, you notice that he uses something to great effect in the same way, because that's a nautical-based story as well, and it's very mysterious. In fact, it's more mysterious than that scene with the subs. He's got a scene with a boat in that. It's really, really cool. Yeah, you're going to love that one. That's a great one. So, hey, yeah, Birdhouse, thanks. Appreciate the update. Yeah, if I get more time, I'll be able to write a lot more coming up. And I do need to get the other stuff published, but I have to start the publishing wing of Liberty Conspiracy for that. And I have to do a fundraiser for that. I don't know. I have to look at what a budget, what sort of will be required for getting the stuff out with, copy editing and getting the artist and stuff like that to do things properly. I do have some things where there is some art that I've already got ready. But I've got like 5 or 6 things getting ready to publish. So just depends on the order of the publications and things. And don't forget, if you do get my story called Fishing, and by the way, be warned that one is published, but be warned, it has some brutal, violent scenes in it. Very brutal scenes. The most ugly scenes I've written and probably ever will. That's as far as I'm going to go. But Fishing is tied to this story Tower. So keep that in mind, please. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. It's pretty cool. So I'll just say that, and that happens in 1972 or so, around Boston, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. So thanks, everybody. I'm gonna leave you with some rockin' stuff. Oh, before we go, actually, I'm gonna do the control voice, and then I do want to show you. Actually, I'll do this on Monday if we have time. There's some video segments that are recorded from RT that are really interesting, where they have this big St. Petersburg economic conference, and they were taking questions from people, and they were talking, Putin was there, and they were talking about the fall of the Soviet Union and how they denationalized a lot of things. And someone mentioned, you might be reselling some of those things. Some people, how are you managing some of these things that were sold off, but there's been some problems with them and people didn't think that it was fair. So Putin goes into it. It's very interesting because it's been one of the key things that especially Westerners have said about the collapse of the Soviet Union. They said a lot of it went to sort of mafia types that were already connected with the Communist Party. They just sort of made it a corporatist type of thing where they gained a lot of the things that the old Soviet government had when they denationalized stuff. Quite interesting stuff from Putin. And again, it shows Putin's very connected attempt to be fair with the people who are listening to him and his approach to things. I was very, very impressed. And as a person who was a very strong anti-communist and grew up with a very strong anti-communist family, it sort of allowed for a punctuation mark to some of those questions that I had, because they're going through a new process to try to allow for better privatization on certain things, but they're trying to handle it very, very well. And it's difficult because that initial sell-off was kind of problematic. And they were aware of it. And so it was very interesting to see them trying to resolve that. Heck of a lot better than what we've seen with things like BlackRock and the military industrial complex here, So, obviously there are going to be ups and downs to all this stuff. But we'll talk about that over at Liberty Conspiracy Monday night, and we'll do the Outer Limits to say goodnight tonight. Remember, head over to Substack. You want to check out the Substack if you're just new to my work because of former Star Trek writing fellow. Thank you for finding the channel. And spread the links. I hope you had a good time tonight. And I'm going to grab some chow. I'm going to go to the mess hall and grab some chow. And maybe I'll get some fish. Make sure they're clean. Some fish sticks. You're very clean, aren't you? So we'll say goodnight with the Outer Limits outro with the control voice. And he's going to... I have to do one thing before we go. I have to press, the Russian team has to press an extra button to make sure that the sound is correct there, because StreamYard did an update, but we have uncovered their plans. And now I have to do just a little more work to make sure everything operates right, but hopefully there'll be no echo. Have a great night, everybody. God bless you all. Take care.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the Outer Limits.